And I think I'm starting us off. And I want to welcome everyone to the webinar and appreciate the many people who have joined us. And I'm sorry we can't all see one another, but that would be really overwhelming, I think. But I appreciate that I can see at least the panelists and see the candidates for Secretary of the State. But I do want to say a couple of words about Common Cause and Common Cause in Connecticut, that we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan citizens lobby that has been working since 1970 for open, honest, and accountable government for everyone. Our members and coalition partners have won historic voting rights legislative victories over the years, and so many that I don't want to list them all. It would take too long, and I get cut off at the legislature for going over my 3 minutes, and I know Bilal will cut me off because I'm not even sure I have 3 minutes now. But we are very excited that in this legislative session, we have addressed a lot of the concerns that we had around foreign spending in our elections, around a Connecticut Voting Rights Act, which will provide additional protection for Black and people of color. And we're disappointed that the ranked choice voting bill that we had been hoping for to at least give people an opportunity to study it, to think about it, and see what would work in Connecticut, because it's worked in other states, and we're very interested in knowing how we can make that happen here. We also had a bill that we're supporting on post-election audits, and that bill did make it out of committee as well. So I'm very happy to say that. But with that said, because there's way too much to talk about, I want to introduce Dr. Bilal Dabir Siku, who is an associate professor at the Hillier College at the University of Hartford. He's been there for many years. He can tell us how many years. And also that he's been on the board of Common Cause in Connecticut for another many years. He doesn't like to give us numbers, so we have a hard time keeping track of him. But he is also on the board of the Connecticut Mirror, the Connecticut Open Communities Alliance, and the Common Cause National Governing Board, which is his national organization that takes up so much of his time because they have meetings every day that they expect him to be at. So I am pleased to introduce him to you and to welcome him to this discussion. So thank you, Doctor.
Sure. Thanks so much, Sherry, for that introduction, and thanks to everyone who is participating tonight, all of the candidates for the Secretary of State's office. So I'll move really quickly. What I want to do is I want to sort of quickly go over sort of the format and ground rules for this forum, and then move into questions, because this is a night for the folks who want to be the Secretary of State to let us share with us their ideas about that office. So the first thing is each candidate will have a maximum of 2 minutes to provide a candidate statement describing why they're running for the Secretary of State. Then each candidate will have an opportunity to answer each set question with a maximum answer time of 3 minutes. And me as the moderator, I'll signal to you about 20 seconds. I'll signal to you that you have 20 seconds left. To wrap up within that 3 minutes. And then the order of candidates will also change for each question to ensure fairness to all of the candidates. Each candidate then will have a maximum of 1 minute to answer audience questions emailed to us at Connecticut@commoncause.org. And we'll put that up again, I'm sure. If time allows, as selected by the moderator, audience questions will be directed to all the candidates. This is really important, not to direct questions just at a specific candidate, but to direct questions that all of the candidates can answer in 1 minute for folks who want to ask questions. The forum participants may not interrupt one another. This is not a debate, but an opportunity to take time to state your position on these issues that we raise. Time limits on statements and answers will be enforced by the moderator. I've been told that I actually have the power to cut the mics off, and so I'll exercise that power. And again, as the moderator, I feel free to intervene if any of these ground rules are not followed, and reserves the right, as I said, to mute microphones if necessary. So with that said, let's dive right into it. And so what I'd like to do is, in a 2-minute statement for each candidate, to talk about why they are running for the Secretary of State. And let me start with Representative Stephanie Thomas.
I love that random order. Good evening, everyone. I'm Stephanie Thomas. I represent Norwalk, Wilton, and Westport. I'm running for Secretary of the State for the same reason I ran for state representative, to insert a new voice into the political process, to elevate people over politics, and to shine a light on how our government actually works so that this representative form of democracy is actually representative. I'm running because I don't believe this job can be a political stepping stone. It cannot be considered simply a job. It's of paramount importance now more than ever. And I think job number one over the next 4 years is to ensure that Connecticut can run safe and fair elections. I think this job is about making sure that towns have the resources that they need to implement those elections, about making sure every voter knows that their vote matters and that they are inspired to make their voice heard at the ballot box. It's about implementing the many laws that have already passed the legislature. It's about making it easier for businesses to spend time on running their businesses. In short, I think this job is about all of you. And I'm running because this is personal to me, because it's my passion, because this role cannot be what it has always been, and I'm focused on what it can be. My nonprofit fundraising experience has grounded me in the importance of transparency and trust. My experience in business, first rising from intern to company president, and later starting my own company, has taught me how to fulfill a vision and manage teams and large projects. My legislative experience has allowed me to make the connections needed to work with all the branches of government in Hartford. You will not have enough time tonight to learn about me, so I encourage you to visit votestephaniethomas.com to learn more. Thank you.
That was really good. Right on, right on, 2 minutes. Why don't we go now to Representative Josh Elliott?
Thanks for having me. So there's first the why. The why is, we know that there's some major issues nationally and here at home in terms of being attacked from outside, hackers, invaders to our election process. And while we can address that, I also think it's important that whoever's running for the seat also have the ability to execute well, but then also be able to push the franchise forward. So there's some things in particular that I think make me a good fit. And then in terms of why I'm running, I'm a very policy-oriented legislator. So I'm Josh Elliott. I'm the state representative from the 80th District in Hamden. I'm a small business owner, owning and operating 2 businesses with my mother, both natural food stores, about 100 employees between both. One's been around for 25 years and the other I opened 8 years ago. So I know not only what it's like to run an organization, but I know what it's like to interact with the Secretary of State's office and how frustrating that can be for business owners. I'm an attorney, never practiced, the only attorney in the race, and I'm a 3-term legislator who chairs the Higher Education and Employment Advancement Committee. My primary bill last year was a bill to make telecommunications free for people who are incarcerated. Criminal justice reform is really important to me, and I'm actually trying to weave that into this campaign as well. In terms of the policy positions I'm taking, I was the sole introducer for ranked choice voting years ago, before I think Common Cause was even pushing ranked choice voting. So I've been out ahead of that bill for a while now, and I'm comfortable with being the person in the room who's talking about ideas that make people uncomfortable and continue talking and normalizing things until it becomes reality. Another one of these issues I'm talking about now is voting rights for people who are incarcerated, a simple moral and equitable argument that I'm making. voting. And I'm pushing the dialogue when it comes to early voting and no excuse absentee voting. Simply put, I want to follow the model that 7 states follow in the Pacific Northwest, which is 30 days out to vote, and an opt-out versus opt-in model, meaning that you automatically receive your ballot every single cycle.
Thank you
You're
so much.
muted.
Now let's turn to Attorney Cynthia Jennings. Okay.
Okay, thank you so much. First of all, I'd like to say good evening and thank Common Cause for hosting this forum. I'm a civil rights lawyer and I'm an environmental attorney. And I fought I fought to close down a major landfill in North Hartford. I have fought a seated governor to keep him from putting a gas pipeline through the water reservoir where Hartford residents and 8 other towns get their drinking water. And I have fought for the rights of Connecticut citizens to breathe clean, unpolluted air. I continue to fight to remove a toxic garbage incinerator that takes in garbage from 70 towns throughout Connecticut and burns it in Hartford. So I deal with a lot of environmental justice and injustice, but I also deal with a lot of social justice issues as well in my job as an attorney. All right, so what I believe that we must have healthy citizens whose rights are protected by the people that they elect to protect those rights. And I do not believe that the office of the Secretary of State should be controlled by any major political party. That is why I'm running on the independent party line for the position of Secretary of the State. When money, power, and justice are involved, we need a fearless leader who has a history of fighting for the rights of all Connecticut citizens. I support early voting, and we need to support early voting for all Connecticut citizens. And this will especially help people who are homeless, single moms, people who have work restrictions, and people who may not be able to get to the polls on a particular given Tuesday in a particular given year. We need to protect our right to vote. We need to protect our right to run for office, and we need to protect our rights for the citizens of the state of Connecticut. So I would like to thank Common Cause again, and I certainly appreciate being the other attorney on this on this process.
Thank you so much. Let me turn now to Senator Matt Lesser.
Thank you, Bilal. Thank you to Sherry and then to everyone at Common Cause for organizing this. And, you know, I will just say I've been in the trenches now, working with Secretary of State Denise Merrill, but also with Common Cause every step of the way over the last 14 years, the 14 years I've served in the legislature. I'm Matt Lesser. I'm a state senator from Middletown, representing the southern suburbs of Hartford. And I am so interested in this race. I'm so focused on exploring a run for Secretary of State because we're in a crisis of democracy right now. Everything else that we care about, I spent a lot of time fighting for healthcare, whether it's environment, whether it's civil rights, whether it's criminal justice reform. It all depends on whether or not we have a functioning democracy. And we saw last January 6th that our democracy is under real attack. I'm a new father. My son just turned a year a couple months ago, and it's important to me that my son grow up in a democracy just like I was able to. My grandmother escaped the Holocaust. My mother grew up in a dictatorship in Latin America. I don't take our democracy for granted. And yes, we need to pass early voting. We need to implement automatic voter registration. I'm the one who introduced the Connecticut Voting Rights Act that we're going to talk about later. We got to do all of these things, but most importantly, we have to sell our neighbors on democracy. There are too many people in this state and this country who are losing confidence that we settle our differences as Americans at the ballot box. We've got to perfect our democracy, but we also have to make the case that this institution that we've inherited is worth protecting and preserving. And that's going to take someone who's able to get things done in Hartford, but it's also going to take a public advocate willing to go to every community in the state and make the case for what we have. And lastly, I know this is a nonpartisan forum, but it is important that whoever runs for Secretary of State be someone who can win, because there are some very scary people who are not on this forum. And making sure that we have someone who can hold the office, who can win tough battles. I've only run in very tough races, and I've been able to defeat a longtime Republican who held my seat before me. We got to make sure that we win this seat because it's important.
Cut you off.
Thank you, Bilal.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Representative Santiago.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect,
Yes.
Thank you. I want to thank you for having this forum today for Common Cause. I've been to some of their meetings and fundraisers in the past years. But let me tell you why I am running for Secretary of the State. I have the professional managerial skills to work with this office. I have been also involved in community grassroots organizations. And basically, I started working with special needs children, especially my child who had disabilities. And that's how I became an advocate for special ed one time ago. And it was in working with bilingual parents with their PPTs. But I think it's time that we really get to that. I bring a voice to the table. I will lead the conversation at voting rights. And basically, you have to have someone that can work with the community, do the community outreach, that can work from the bottom up, and is able to work with the town clerks and the register of voters. Someone that's going to be able to communicate with them, because they are the frontline folks that are dealing with voters that are registering or issues that might go on in the office. And they're the frontline folks that we need to make sure that we work with, we communicate with, and that if anything changes at the state or local level or federal level, that they're the first ones to know about the information. I am the candidate that will represent, like I said, the communities, the disadvantaged communities, and communities of color, where the dominant demographic leads the conversation about voting rights. And we have to get those folks to the table. And it's very important that people understand that their vote is their voice. And having a vote and being at the table is very important as to how they live their lives and who they trust. And what you stand for is something that they need to understand.
I have to stop you, but
thank you.
Man, I feel like a bad person, like I'm interrupted.
No, that's fine. No.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Those were just great, opening comments, and we've got one more with Alderman Bracken,
that is, and feel free to cut me off.
Bracken.
Yeah, feel free to cut me off when you need to.
Okay.
Good evening. It is such a privilege and an honor. I feel like I'm a part of a rock star tour. What great candidates we have here to share in this forum on tonight. Also, thank you, Common Cause, for all that you do and the work that we have done collectively together in this voting rights fight, in particular the last 3 years during this pandemic. I come from a unique perspective. I'm running from the ground level as an alder on a city council that I've served almost 10 years on. And I am bringing the perspective of the working class individual and the voices of those that have been literally on the front lines of this voting rights fight. Okay, the perspective that I bring is unique. As a nonprofit executive, as an educator of social studies, that was a start to my career, as well as a voting rights activist for all of my life. My background hails through the labor movement. My dad and my mom, I basically, they were part of the labor movement. My dad was the chief steward of SEIU 1199, and I always tell people I was basically born on a picket line. So voting rights, the working class people is everything that I have known and everything that I've worked for my entire life. Attending Fairfield University, Fordham University, political science and history was the area of focus, and education in my master's work. I came back home to the city of New Haven, taught in the public schools, and I don't know if there's any educators in the house, but I probably did the wrong thing and ran for office my first year in, and been on the city council ever since, and balancing that because of the fight around equity and school financing. Look, folks, we see what's happening nationwide, and I strongly believe we need someone who can step in the role of the great work of Secretary Merrill on day one. Democracy is at war in this nation, and we need someone who has had that experience on the front lines to defend us against what's happening right now.
Thank you so much. That's my alarm clock keeps going off for my 3 minutes. So I want to invite Sherry Quickmeyer to make a quick comment.
I just wanted to remind folks that you can send questions to Connecticut at Common Cause CT, or I think it's what it is, Common Cause Connecticut at commoncause.org.
.org, yeah.
But also to remind you that this is being brought on Facebook Live. So if you happen to be watching and you want somebody else to see what's going on, definitely tune into the Facebook channel, look up Common Cause in Connecticut, and you will see the link there to show folks, how they can listen to the questions being asked. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I know that email address also was just put in the chat again. So definitely look in the chat if you want to get the email. So, Mr. Alderman, I want to actually return to you with the first question. So in case you were thinking about relaxing a little bit. So we're going to, as we go randomly and out of order. So the first question that we want to ask is, if elected to be Connecticut Secretary of State, will you endorse, prioritize, and support the enactment of a ban on foreign spending on state ballot referendums, and sort of talk about why?
Yeah, absolutely. I won't need to relax on this one. I've already supported and endorsed it. So I'm with it. And in particular, I know this subject pretty well. I was elected some years ago in 2016, working with the Hillary Clinton campaign on the presidential campaign. I was the city of New Haven's city coordinator on that campaign. And the rumblings and discussions concerning the foreign influence of our democracy has really been troubling all of these years, and ensuring that we have a defender and someone who has been on the work and on the front lines of this work to ensure that our system is safe and secure. And look, this is where we begin to also highlight Secretary Merrill and the great work that she has done to secure our democracy in the state. We have been a great example across this nation. You go anywhere across the nation in terms of the work that has been done in this state to secure our democracy, and Connecticut is highlighted. And like I said, I do support and will continue to support, and I've been on the record in doing so.
Thank you so much. The same question to Representative Josh Elliott.
Yeah, we need to do whatever we can to ensure that we are protecting our democracy. And that comes down to ensuring that we are limiting disinformation, misinformation, and malinformation. And the fact is, the majority of this is coming from outside, whether it's from China or if it's from Russia. We know this beyond a shadow of a doubt. We saw it was here during the elections 4 years ago, and it is likely that we will be combating this every single election indefinitely. And we have had moments where we've really invested in our cybersecurity here. I don't know if we are still doing as well as we can and should be. So that does tie into the question, which is simply to say, do we want foreign money to be here pushing policy? And the answer is no. The answer is that we want to ensure that whatever policies we are enacting are homegrown, based off of what people here want, based on information that is true and real.
Thank you for your answer. Attorney Cynthia Jennings, the same question. You're on mute. You're on mute.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, so if elected to be Connecticut Secretary of State, I will endorse, prioritize, and support the enactment of any ban on foreign spending on state ballot referendums. Now, we do not have state referendums, and we do not have those in Connecticut right now. We don't have those kind of initiatives, but I also would support us having the initiatives where we can bring forward laws and policies, and the people can actually circumvent the legislature if they have to put in laws and policies and practices that will support the growth of voter support and voter power. We really have to recognize that if we take foreign money and allow it to come into Connecticut politics, we are absolutely circumventing the rights of the elected officials here and the voters here that elect those officials to represent them. So I do oppose any type of foreign spending on ballot initiatives, but I do support us starting and initiating ballot initiatives so that the people within this state can vote on the laws and policies and practices that they choose to vote on.
Thank you. Senator Matt Lesser, same question.
Great question, Bilal. And I would say I'm a sponsor of Common Cause's bill to outlaw this practice. Look, we can watch on the news every night Russian tanks rolling into Ukraine to try to subvert that country's democracy, but it is an outrage. And I want to just emphasize, it is an outrage. They don't have to do that in Connecticut because it is completely legal today for Russia to spend money to get to influence the early voting referendum that we'll have on our ballot this November, or any local referendum. The fact of the matter is, this is a huge loophole in our campaign finance laws that should have been plugged long ago. We're working to do it this year. And absolutely, it's a priority. But as other folks have said, that's not the only threat from abroad, because in 2016, the Russian government tried to hack into Connecticut's voter registration database. Denise Merrill, working with the Department of Homeland Security, copped them. And whoever takes over next January 1 has to be ready to do the job on day one. There's an awful lot going to face the next Secretary of State. I don't think foreign interference is behind us. We have a lot of work ahead of us, and I'm ready to do the job.
Thank you so much. Representative Santiago, the same question.
I would like to say that we do need to tighten up our rules and our laws in the state of Connecticut to make sure that we don't have foreign influence, but we need to make sure that it happen at all levels of government, at the federal, state, and local level. And we need to make sure that the disinformation or misinformation doesn't get into our elections. This should be a nonpartisan issue because it benefits all the parties included. Our lives and experience dictates how we vote, how we support, and who we trust in voting. So we need to really tighten up those laws, and we shouldn't. I mean, we're trying to change the laws now where you have someone that can put money into your campaign and up to $10,000, and C can't do anything about it because you see that. As long as the candidate says, and it's not connected to the candidate, they can spend up to $10,000 in influencing media for that particular candidate. So, things like that still need to be changed. We have a great SEEK program. A lot of other states don't have that, but we do need to do a lot better in controlling what happens with foreign. And the security and the technology has to be improved. Trying to keep foreign money out is something that the Secretary of the State has been doing. And when she received the $5 million from the ARPA money in order to expand voting rights in the state of Connecticut, security was one of the things that she really looked at to make sure. The one thing that is in our favor, as 169 towns have different ways of how they run their elections. And because they have computer systems and some of them are not that up to date in technology, they weren't able to hack as much as they did in other states. We did get hacked, but because our systems are so different in the 169 towns, it was less prevalent in our system. So there's still a lot of work to be done on that facet of campaign elections.
Thank you for that answer. Representative Thomas.
Thank you. So I think the Common Cause audience probably knows all this, but I want to back up for a second just to make it clear that federal law already bans foreign nationals from spending in federal, state, and local elections. But the Federal Elections Commission just passed, or they had a ruling in July that exempted referendums. And our current statutes here in Connecticut said, and I wrote it, I think it's 9-620C, says that any sort of political committee formed to promote or defeat a referendum shall not receive contributions from a national or federal or out-of-state office. So we just passed our out of committee on Monday, SB 431. As Senator Lesser said, he's a co-sponsor of that bill. When I looked this morning, I realized only 2 people co-sponsored it. So all of us legislators need to go back in the system and co-sponsor today. But we had a public hearing on it 2 weeks ago. It was very well received. We only had 1 piece of testimony in opposition. And this is really an issue in Connecticut because our ballot referendums, unlike other states, are really just at the statewide level, really just have to do with constitutional amendments. But where it's really dangerous in Connecticut is it's usually towns that have ballot referendums like charter reform, et cetera, where even a little bit of foreign money can really drown out sort of local voices. So this bill is in, I'm definitely a supporter. I'll become a co-sponsor by 10 p.m. tonight. And because this loophole is recent, all states are scrambling to sort of cover it. So far, only 7 states in the US have closed the loophole, and there are a bunch more, I think about a dozen, including Connecticut, who are working on legislation now. So I absolutely support. Oh, and I will just say, you know, misinformation and cybersecurity, as my colleagues touched upon, also different problems, you know, as Rep. Santiago alluded to, the 169 towns makes it more difficult for things like phishing, ransomware attacks, that type of thing. But misinformation is much more insidious, much more dangerous, I think, because it's spread neighbor to neighbor. And Secretary Merrill just put in an appropriation to hire a misinformation officer last month. So I would, as Secretary, work to continue that investment to make sure that we can fight misinformation. Thank you.
Thank you for that answer. Let me turn to a second question that you saw on the questionnaire. If elected to be Connecticut's Secretary of State, will you endorse, prioritize, and support the enactment of a Connecticut Voting Rights Act to give Black, brown, and other voters of color additional protections against voter suppression? So I'd like to start with Attorney Jennings first.
Thank you. Well, certainly we need to make it easier for people to vote in Connecticut, and we should make it easy for citizens to run for office. No one should be illegally denied the right to run for office or the right to vote in Connecticut. And it may surprise Connecticut residents to learn that the nutmeg state is significantly more restrictive than Georgia in voting and ballot access. So when you're talking about us supporting the enactment of a Connecticut Voting Rights Act, certainly we can't. There are drafts and there are acts that, you know, there is legislation that's out there, but we certainly know that it's in the draft form right now. I'm sure that it'll be after the testimony and so many other things after these forums, that there will be certain other additional things added to these things. But we need to understand that we need to fight for justice and put an end to voter suppression in Connecticut. This includes supporting open primaries where independents and unaffiliates are the majority of the Connecticut voters, and they can participate in one or two of the major primary voting, the major primaries. And it's important that the unaffiliates and the independent voters do involve themselves in primaries. The primaries are often the election. I also support no excuse absentee balloting, where every voter is given the option to vote by absentee ballot, irrespective of what their reason is. And we also need to support curbside voting for disabled and elderly voters who could get, you know, who should be allowed to vote from their cars. We actually have that in Connecticut, and we should really make sure that people know that that's, you know, that's a reality. And most importantly, we need to support lifetime voter registration. There was so much purging of the voter lists in Connecticut that after every major election, we have to re-register people that might have been registered 5, 10, 15 times already. That should be purging is a major form of voter suppression. It has to be stopped. And you should register one time in your life to vote. So it's very important that we register to vote and we maintain those people on the registry, and that we not allow a major party to control the office of the Secretary of the State. That is our democracy. That is our protection. That is why I'm running on the independent line. It's because we must make sure that those individuals that are out there and being purged from those voters lists are not being purged because one party wants to stay in power over another party. So I absolutely support the implementation also of a recall vote for those individuals, those elected officials who violate the public trust. If you violate the public trust, it should not be up to you as to whether or not you remain in office. It should be a recall vote of the voters.
Thank you for that answer. Alderman Brackeen.
Yes, the answer is yes. I do support and have been on the record with Common Cause and other coalitions statewide. I serve as the chairman of Generation Change CT, which is a voting rights organization I founded after coming off of the work that I did on the Biden and Harris campaign, traveling the nation, actually experiencing what restrictive voting laws look like in Georgia and South Carolina, and the hiccups that happen in the Iowa caucuses. Look, Connecticut has the most restrictive voting laws outside the South. And communities of color are the ones who are routinely impacted. So look, as someone that's been on the ground of actually troubleshooting a lot of issues, in particular in our urban communities, and having that direct experience, we have to ensure that this finally gets passed. And kudos to the legislators who proposed it, but we also have to ensure that local voter registrars, town clerks, and the people, the workers of the polls, and I think I'm one of two people who's actually worked in a poll, is involved in the process and collaboration and support of this law and the passage of it.
Thank you. Representative Santiago.
Thank you. If elected as Connecticut Secretary of the State, I would surely make sure that we have some kind of a Connecticut voting rights bill. We did pass something in the legislature last year, but it wasn't taken up by the Senate. And if we need to pass something, because if nothing has been done at the federal level with the voting rights bill, and that bill is being taken apart slowly by the federal government, by Congress, we need to protect those rights at the state level, and we need something. So the Connecticut Voting Rights Act, we are passing something similar this session with Bill 471, and it does include some of that stuff. I've also helped shape that idea into a 28-page, but we need to make sure that something is passed in Connecticut, because as it's been said, we do have one of the toughest voting in the state of Connecticut. We don't have early voting, and that's something that has to be changed at the state level with the state constitution. And we don't have the absentee ballot. And we have to make sure that in making those changes, that security and technology is added to that. And we have to make sure that when we do pass something that is makes the state stronger in voting rights, that we are able to make sure that people know about it, that the community outreach is made at the local level, the grassroots, starting with the Democratic town committees, so they know what the rules are, the towns and the town clerks and the registrar of voters. And we need to make sure that other people are involved in the process, the NAACP, the League of Women Voters, and that they're all part of that process.
Thank you so much for that answer. Representative Elliott.
I think underlying this bill and a lot of what we're talking about is trying to ensure that the right to vote and access to that right are made as easy as possible. And there's a number of ways that we can do this. We can simply enshrine into law and say that it's a right, but I also think the actual mechanics of how we're employing the system is incredibly important. When Colorado has their election, by the time election day rolls around, over half of the people that will have ended up voting have already voted by election day. And that's because they allow people to vote so early with so many different ways. You can send your ballot in the mail. You can drop it off at a voting location, voting center. You can drop it off at a box. You can drop it off at these clearly marked vans that will let neighborhoods know when they're going to be there. So it's government coming to neighborhoods. And so whenever we talk about things that nip around the problem, like making election day a holiday or only a couple days out to vote, or as the other attorney in this race mentioned, clearing the rolls and not having automatic voter registration be as forward thinking as possible, we should always be comparing ourselves to the states that do this best, because there's no reason why we can't. We are one of the wealthiest states in the country, and we have a fairly progressive legislature when it comes to a variety of issues. It just so happens that a big part of the problem in terms of the process is getting everybody on board the same page and the same vision, the same mission, and then demanding of the legislature through a unified political bloc that those resources are there. Because registrars and clerks want to be doing this work, but they need to ensure that they have the support that they need from what is essentially the management level, which is the legislature and the Secretary of the State's office. And while yes, a lot of this happens on the municipal level, that support has to exist. So it is system overhaul that we're talking about, because ultimately we are about 15 years behind. And I think more than not in Connecticut, it's due to simple negligence. It's not due to malfeasance, but that doesn't make it any less insidious. And I think that there is an incredible amount of work that we need to do. So we paint the picture, we invest the resources. We know that change isn't going to come immediately. It will take years to develop, but we have the vision for where we're trying to go, and we make sure that the administrators are on the same page.
Thank you for that answer. Representative Thomas.
Thank you. Yes, SB 471, a big supporter. It just passed out of committee a couple of days ago. There's one section I still find problematic with regard to providing materials and assistance in multiple languages. And it's problematic not because it's not sorely needed, but because the language right now is a little sort of loose around who pays for that. And I think it should come from the state level and not be passed down to the individual municipalities. But I'd like to thank the NAACP Legal Defense Fund for their leadership on this bill. I serve as vice chair of the Government Administration and Elections Committee. So it's been great. Last year and this year, we have seen a lot of great legislation, but I don't think legislation can do everything. And I think the type of suppression that this bill will address is not the only problem facing people of color in Connecticut. We don't talk at all about the chilling effect that systemic racism has on voter turnout. It keeps people that look like me from running for office, which in turn sometimes keeps people from going to the polls because they don't feel represented. It keeps people from going to the polls because there's this feeling that no matter what bills are passed, nothing ever changes. And that's why I got into this race, because I think we have to focus on civic education and civic engagement for children and adults. No entity has ever been responsible for this, and it slips through the cracks as a result. And I believe that this is the missing piece of puzzle to help people realize the goal of this representative form of democracy, because until everyone, including Black and Brown people, maybe especially Black and Brown people, learn how our government works and are taught how to advocate for the issues that they care about, I don't think we'll ever see the system change that we want. And I think the next Secretary of the State has an opportunity to serve as a leader in this area. ever since I got elected, I live in Norwalk, and anyone who will listen, I try to teach them about the legislature and how to impact the passage of bills. And I was glad to see this year, especially with the remote option, so many people from Norwalk showed up to testify in public hearings. And I think most people out there would be surprised to learn how 20 calls, 100 emails can really make the difference between whether or not a piece of legislation passes. So I encourage people to get involved in addition to legislators passing these types of bills. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Matt Lesser, your response to the question.
Yeah, thank you, Bilal. Look, I wrote the Connecticut Voting Rights Act, so obviously I support it. Worked with some really smart attorneys from the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. And I introduced the bill last year. We didn't get it through. We introduced it this year, and I'm increasingly optimistic and that we're getting our message across. This bill is a game changer. It comes from frustration that the federal courts, the right-wing courts, have struck down sections 2 and 5, gutted sections 2 and 5 of the Federal Voting Rights Act. And that voter suppression is not just a problem in Georgia and Alabama and Texas. It's actually a problem right here in Connecticut. It's a problem when you have municipalities having election issues year on year end, many times the same municipalities, many times communities that have large numbers of people of color living in them, where places run out of ballots, where there are improper instructions given about voter ID requirements, and where local redistricting happens frequently in a black box, one in which the rights of people of color are not protected. This bill will really change a lot, and it will provide a real opportunity for the Secretary of State's office to go in and pierce through places where we have this tradition of local control in Connecticut, but that is in tension sometimes with the right of each and every citizen to cast a lawful ballot. I do want to lift up the work of Alderman Brickeen and his organization and so many other grassroots and community groups, many of which are on this Zoom, in making sure that it's not just something that I'm trying to do up in Hartford, but this is happening out in the communities. We're really making the message that we need a State Voting Rights Act. We cannot wait on Washington. And yes, it got out of committee last week, but we got a lot of work to do. We got to make sure that there's funding for it in the budget so that people who don't speak English, as Representative Thomas mentioned, do have access to materials in their language, that's not a barrier to vote. And then also we're giving an opportunity for groups like Common Cause to bring lawsuits. So they don't have to go through the Secretary of State's office to protect the right of a citizen of this state to cast a ballot. It shouldn't be up to a party boss. It shouldn't be up to a Democratic town committee. And it certainly shouldn't be up to whoever the Secretary of State is as to whether or not a vote is counted equally in each of our 169 towns. And until we have a situation where there's not one longer line in any one community than in any other, we have more work to do to make sure that our voting rights are protected right here in Connecticut. I'm already doing the work, and I hope you'll join me in getting it done.
Thank you so much for your answers to that question to all of the candidates. I want to turn to a third question, and Senator Lesser, I'll come back to you with this third question. If elected to be Connecticut Secretary of the State, will you endorse, prioritize, and support the enactment of ranked choice voting bill to create a task force to study the implementation of RCV for state, federal, and municipal elections in Connecticut? And before you answer, let me also remind people to send their questions to us. You can send them at connecticut@commoncause.org. Thank you. Sorry about that, Senator Lesser.
No, quite all right, Bilal, and it's a great question. Look, I obviously I'll fast track a passage of the study bill, but more importantly, we don't need a study bill to do a study. I think the next Secretary of State has the ability to convene people from the registrars, from the town clerks, legislators, get people around the table. Look, states all around the country are moving to enact ranked choice voting. I have a good friend of mine, Senator Kawasaki from Fairbanks, Alaska, who tells me that passing ranked choice voting was the smartest thing he ever did. Look, I don't know if it's right for Connecticut, but I think we should absolutely take a look at it. And the best way to do that is to convene that stakeholder group immediately. There's no excuse for dragging our heels. I'm hearing from people all across Connecticut that they're interested in this issue. And I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time. And even as we're working to pass early voting and do all of the other things, we should be able to look at that important question. And if I'm the next Secretary of State, I'll make sure that we have that group ready on day one.
Thank you. Representative Thomas.
Thank you. Endorse, yes. Prioritize, no. Support, yes. Look, I tell people the truth. In case you haven't noticed, study bills are where many issues go to die in the legislature. It's the way to get it off the agenda. And if it doesn't already have a wide cross-section of support, the study comes back and it sits on a shelf. Worse, if it sits on that shelf for too long, the whole study bill has to be undertaken again if too much time has passed. So I actually think that is the wrong question, and I would suggest two others. One, what are the opportunity costs associated with pushing for the adoption of ranked choice voting based on what else is happening in Connecticut right now? The truth is, as a manager, you cannot do everything. You don't have the time or the resources. So if we take up ranked choice voting, are we switching our attention away from improving our election audit system, early voting, no excuse absentee voting, automatic voter registration, improving our database, etc.? We really, it's just reality. You cannot do everything. And I think the second question we should be asking is, what else can we do besides this study bill that would actually, I think, move the ball further down the field? A few hundred people have written to me, and I've written them back to say that I think there's three things that could be done to usher in this movement a little faster. One, it's time to get the town clerks and registrars at the table. GAE will not pass any voting reform without their robust support. And I don't think we've heard enough about any of their concerns or, what they think about it. Two, any legislation will be much more effective, I believe, if it trickles up from the people instead of trickling down from the legislature. A lot of people don't like that. So continue the efforts to educate people. And just to give everyone on this call a sense, over the past 2 years, or all of 2021 and the first quarter of this year, I've received about 300 to 400 emails about ranked choice voting. However, in 1 week, I got 2,000 emails on other issues. So we still have work to do to educate people and get them to write their legislators and elevate it from the ground up. And as Senator Lesser said, I don't think we need the secretary or the legislature to do a study bill. Any legislator on this call could start a task force and do the same work that the study bill would be doing. And there's also another bill that is also percolating around that would actually implement ranked choice voting. I think my time is up.
Thank you so much. Attorney Jennings. I think you're on mute.
All right, thank you very much. Although we can't do everything, we can certainly do some things. And I think it's important that we do something that will also uplift the voters and allow people to run for office and not believe that their votes are being thrown away. If all you have are 2 candidates, as opposed to maybe 4, 5, or 6 candidates, you can only vote for one, then you're going to be concerned about the majority party, how many people are going to be voting for this, will my vote be thrown away? I think it's very important, not that anything we do, if we set up a task force or a study, it's got to have a time limitation on it. Because when we're talking about setting up a task force, we already have states that are doing ranked choice voting and doing very well with it. So we need to put a time limit on how long we study anything and how much money we spend studying anything, and talk about implementation of ranked choice voting. It gives other people an opportunity. It keeps people from, it gives people options outside of the regular voting process and being able to actually vote for people who they think might do a better job, as opposed to might have the most money or might have the most power, political power to win. So I think it's important that we not only study it, but that we also implement it.
Thank you. Alderman Brackeen.
Thank you very much. My answer is yes. We should pass the study bill, also prioritize it. And actually, a personal story. When Voter Choice Connecticut approached me a few years ago through Alderman Steve Winter, who was a colleague who was very supportive of ranked choice voting, he really opened my eyes to the justice lens that ranked choice voting lends, right? So as an alderman, a local elected official, I know folks have always questioned, well, how does an alder go and run for statewide office? It's because I believe I strongly am qualified and I have individuals who support me. But if ranked choice voting was involved in this process, it would clear up and elevate the voices of people of color, such as myself, coming from urban centers. This is an example, actually. Going through this exploratory primary process has been very interesting. There's 6, 7 of us, 8 of us at some point running. Imagine what it would have looked like to have a conversation of ideas that raises the level of the candidates as well as the diversity. So for me, I strongly stand in support of it. And I also, I have to say, Representative Elliott has led the charge on this, and I strongly stand with him and the cause that he has concerning this. But I also believe that voter registrars and city clerks, their voices need to be brought to the table. And I'm going to tell you, I haven't run into too many of them who are totally on board with the idea yet. But I suspect if there was the right person in the right seat to explain and to walk through a pilot example coming into the local level, holding, maybe it's a ranked choice vote on who has the best pizza. I don't know, right? I'm just putting on my educator's hat. There seems to me to be more learning that needs to be had across this state at this point. But as a person, an individual, and I've been on the record through my work to be a supporter of the study bill, as well as fast tracking some type of implementation.
Thank you very much for your answer. Speaking of Representative Josh Elliott, Representative Elliott.
So this has been one of the issues I've been working on for a number of years. And let's just talk about why Maine implemented ranked choice in the first place. When they had their governor's election and they elected LePage, this far right candidate won with a bare plurality of the vote. And what ranked choice voting is attempting to assuage is the problem of people being able to win with bare pluralities. Look to the Republican primary, when in the beginning, Trump wasn't winning more than 30%. But that was enough to continue gaining steam over the course of time. What ranked choice voting does ensures that whoever wins with a majority of the vote. It ensures that you as a voter can vote for who you want and against who you don't want. It eliminates the possibility of a spoiler candidate, and it makes races more congenial. Even this race that we're in right now, when we go to the convention, if the rules of the convention are such that we have a runoff and we have different rounds, multiple rounds, whoever's in last place gets knocked off, we're essentially using the sort of ranked choice voting system, because people are going to be going to their second and third choices if their first choice gets knocked out early. And so I've been using this opportunity to not only talk about ranked choice, but also I view this through the ranked choice lens as well, because there's a benefit to being somebody's second favorite in a race like this, but also with ranked choice voting writ large. One of the issues with ranked choice voting is that we have fusion voting in Connecticut, meaning that you can vote for one candidate on different lines and it tallies up together. So that is a big problem with ranked choice voting, because minority parties believe that, and I believe this as well, is that people need an opportunity to say what kind of Democrat they want to vote for or what kind of Republican they're voting for. And so I think it allows people to say a message, to give a message. With ranked choice voting, you might not be able to have that. And so what you do with these task forces or study groups is you convene people. And I'll be honest, if we can't get a study group out of GAE, we're not going to get a bill out of GAE. So while yes, some bills do go to study groups or task forces to die, I've been on enough task groups or study groups to know that it's places where some bills can live. And so I do think that any step in a forward momentum that we can be taking with regard to ranked choice voting is something that's incredibly positive. And it just might be that we're continuing to talk about this until we're in the right place at the right time. And what I told people when we were talking about the fight to legalize the recreational use of cannabis, it doesn't matter that 70% favorable for the public. What matters is who specifically is at the helm of judiciary or general law, who specifically is in the legislature. So by continuing to popularize this idea, eventually over time, we will have the right people in the right places. I just don't think it's there yet. So we got to keep on talking about it. Thank you.
Representative Santiago, your answer to that question.
Thank you, Doctor. I do support ranked choice voting, but I think that it's not something that I would prioritize right now. In the state of Connecticut, we don't even have early voting. We don't even have no excuse absentee ballots. We don't have a lot of other voting rights that a lot of these southern states have that we don't even have in the state of Connecticut. So let's start by taking that energy that everyone has with this ranked choice voting. And I told Representative Elliott that. Let's take these young people, let's take all these people that are these folks that are voters that are really pushing this ranked choice voting, and let's take all that energy and move it to early voting. Let's take that first, because you have working families, people that have 2 and 3 jobs like I did at one time, people that for some reason at the last minute cannot vote or they have something planned. Early voting would get more people involved right now in order to come out to vote for the candidates that they want to. Let's spend our energy. Early voting, we have to do so many voter education, just to tell people that there's a referendum at the 2022 election, right? Because last time we had that, it got missed in 2014. And it's taken almost 10 years in order to put this back on the ballot. Let's concentrate on that. And then let's work on early voting, where we will have public hearings. We'll have input from the NAACP, League of Women Voters, other organizations, in order to make early voting a reality. And that alone, it's not going to be implemented probably until 2026. Because 2024 is a major election for presidential. Do you know the confusion and back push that you're going to get from town clerks and registrar voters because they're not going to be ready? You have to make sure you put technology, security, and money from the state to make sure that everyone has those resources at the local level. You have 169 towns that you have to deal with. Let's get early voting first. Let's do the no excuse absentee ballot and eventually get a task force. Why are we going to have a task force in 2023 when it's going to sit on the table, on the shelf for another 3 or 4 years? And then by that time, we have to do another one. So yeah, I believe in ranked choice voting, but it's not, from what I've read, it's not good for minority groups. It's not good for women. And it diminishes the power of the local town committee, which is the grassroots of where you nominate and create candidates that are running for office. So that's my take on it, I'm trying to be honest. So I wouldn't concentrate on that right now.
Thank you so much. Wow, we've got a great conversation going on here, and I'm really enjoying learning from all of you and your various approaches to the job if you were elected. We have a few questions that have come in from the audience. And again, I want to encourage people to run a little bit ahead, so we got some time to get into some questions. As we said before, we'd like to try to do like a 1 minute, if possible, answer to the question so we can get in as many of them as we possibly can. And so I'd like to start with the first one and actually return to Representative Santiago with this question because you raised it several times. If elected Secretary of the State, what is your vision for successfully implementing early voting should voters decide on November 8th, 2022 to finally allow early voting in our state?
First of all, my vision is that we include all the stakeholders at the table, have study groups or have groups around the state to have ideas on how people want to, how many days, for example, do you want it from 3 to 5 days? Do you want it 5 days? Do you want it a week, 2 weeks? We have to have that kind of participation and collaboration with all the stakeholders. Once we do that, at the same time, we write a bill. The Secretary of the State has to present that bill to the legislature, and having relationships, good relationships with the Democrats and the Republicans is going to be key in passing that bill through the legislature. And again, the participation has to be collaboratively, it has to be a teamwork, and you have to make sure that youth is involved, the town clerks and the registrar of voters, people with disabilities, people, the elderly, the nonprofit organizations, and it's going to be a lot of work to get that through the legislature. It's not easy. So that's about it. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you. Alderman Brackeen. The same question.
Yes, and actually, for me, this is an executive managerial question, not a legislative one in particular. This is if the voters decide that early voting is what they want. And implementation, step one, is talk to the people who actually have to implement it. So it's my hope to go to ROVEC and the town clerks conference to convene and to meet with the task force forces that exist already to create a more robust communication and platform to get folks together to figure out the first step, and that's training. There's going to be a lot of comprehensive training that's going to be needed in terms of trying to figure out the logistics of implementing early voting based on the 169 ways in towns and cities that are already doing things presently. So that's the first thing. Secondly, we need to look at local municipalities and their budgets. So once the people, I believe it will pass, especially making that as a commitment and a priority of my campaign, at least, seeing the passage of this happen, we have to fund. No more unfunded mandates. So it'll be up to the state legislature, and this is a legislative issue, increase the budgets to provide grants during a time of a primary and a general election right before, so that the town clerks and voter registrars can temporarily at least increase their staffing, provide the training that's needed on the ground, as well as providing the opportunities in the community to also educate folks on the process as well. And that's part three, making sure community is at the table. I don't know if that was
thank you for your answer. Senator Matt Lesser, your response to the question, and let me just read the question again. If elected Secretary of the State, what is your vision for successfully implementing early voting should voters decide to finally allow early voting in our state?
Yeah, thank you, Bilal. And first of all, I want to apologize because I'm the father of a 1-year-old. I think that automatically means I have a cold. So if you see me coughing, it's not because I'm not paying attention. Look, first of all, I don't want to, I love the premise of your question, but I don't want to just assume that early voting is going to pass. You know, all of us, whether we win the nomination or not, need to make sure that we do everything we can to pass early voting. You know, I think the fear is that voters are going to only find out about early voting when they enter the polling booth in November, and that can't happen. We got to get the word out. It's popular when people know about it, but we got to tell people about it and make sure that people know about this important referendum item. But, you know, I think your question goes back, and I think other folks have hit on this, to the fact that for years we've had this back and forth between Hartford and towns, where whoever the Secretary of State is battling town clerks and registrars over election administration. We just can't afford to do that right now. You know, over the last couple of years, we've seen every frontline election worker in the state be attacked. People have been subject to harassment. Republican registrars being accused of being part of the deep state or taking payments from George Soros. We have to support them, support frontline election workers, and convince them that we're all in this together. So yes, I want to implement early voting. It's going to be the first priority for whoever the next Secretary of State is, and we've got to make sure that they're part of it. And if we believe in democracy, if we believe that it's a priority, we should fund it. We should fund it by funding the Secretary of State's office, and we should also fund the frontline election workers, without whom we wouldn't have a democracy. And we just can't assume that democracy is just going to happen if we just turn the other way. It's just, elections happen in our towns every year. We've got to support.
I got to cut you off though, but
that's okay, Bilal.
I'm sorry. Sorry about that. But
no problem. Take care.
Representative Thomas.
Yes, we have to make sure it passes first, and I have been working on that. I feel like tirelessly sometimes since last summer. Once we pass it, I think we're all going to be very similar in this answer. We have to sit down with town clerks, registrars. In addition to unfunded mandates, what I hear the most from registrars and clerks in the big cities is that all of our laws are written for small towns when it comes to election administration. So we have to sit down, make sure all the voices of all the types of towns that we have are represented, and figure out what will work. I'm hoping we can do something in the legislature that would start one way and end another. I don't think Connecticut will be ready to implement an early voting time period that is longer than 1 week, and maybe just one weekend, which was Secretary Merrill's suggestion a couple of years ago, just based on funding and how things work. But then I hope we can get to at least a 2-week period later down the road. I think my minute's up, so I'll stop.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Attorney Jennings.
All right, thank you very much. One of the things we have to take a look at, and the question is, what would be my vision to successfully implement early voting? Number one, we'd have to do it through the school system, which would be an excellent opportunity for a civics lesson for every single school, so that they could talk about how they're going to implement early voting and what it means to them and their families. I think we also have to pull together specific training for the town clerks, the registrars, local and elected officials such as the Board of Aldermen and the town councils. We have to do public service announcements so that people understand what it means to do early voting and how you're going to engage this process. And we just have to make sure that it's run like the census runs their information through. They have every elected official, they have community colleges, they have high schools and other types of issues that are brought forward. And we have to have enough involvement where people understand on election day, or at the beginning of the 15 days, and I would say it would be 15 days, that what has to be done and how you engage in early voting.
Thank you so much. Representative Elliott.
So, as a reminder to everybody on here, this constitutional amendment for early voting and no excuse absentee voting failed 8 years ago when it went to the public, and it failed in part because people didn't know that it was going to be on the ballot, and then when they saw it on the ballot, they did not understand the question. A couple of those things are going to be a little bit different this time of year, this time around, I should say. And one of the reasons, or one of the big reasons, is the fact that because we're going through a pandemic and people have now voted through a no excuse absentee system, people are more aware that it exists. Because as I've been going around the state and talking about how broad we should be making this this whole mechanism, people who have been to Colorado, Oregon, Washington, California, they recognize how far behind we are. But now I think more people generally recognize that we're far behind. And that is why I think that will be successful. It has about 70% approval in the state. And it is important to be thinking then in terms of implementation. And that's going to come down to, as my friends in this race have said, resources, resources, resources. And I'll just close to say that the most important thing we can do is recognize that the registrars and clerks are often the most popular people in their town. As a political bloc, registrars, clerks, and the Secretary of State's office ought to be able to move mountains if they're working together.
Thank you so much for your answers to that question. I'm going to go back to the questions from the audience. We've got a second one that came in from Sandy Sawan, and I'm probably mispronouncing this, but the question is this: current barriers to voting behind bars disproportionately impacts already marginalized citizens in our communities and are remnants of historical race-based exclusion from the vote, and are contrary to efforts to facilitate re-entry by allowing those who are incarcerated to maintain community ties and have a voice in the policy decisions impacting their families. Would you support ballot access for people behind bars? And so I want to start with Attorney Jennings for this question.
Okay, thank you very much. I absolutely would support ballot access for people behind bars. We have to recognize that everyone behind bars is not a felon. I mean, people are in there for civil problems or civil issues where they have not lost their right to vote. So right away, that's the low-hanging fruit. You immediately give those people an opportunity to vote while they're in prison, because they have not lost their rights. I would also state that it's important that we make sure that people within the prison system are kept up to date on what's going on. They don't have access to the internet and all that because of where they are. But the bottom line is that we can have organizations that are going into the prisons, and also those individuals that are working with people in the prisons, make sure that they are kept abreast of who's running for office, what's going on, and whether or not they are actually eligible to vote themselves.
Thank you. Senator Matt Lesser.
Yeah, thank you, Bilal. Look, this is an obvious justice issue, and I think it's important that we recognize that Maine and Vermont never took the right to vote away from incarcerated people, and there are a lot of people in custody today who have the right to vote in theory, but don't in practice. Right? People who are in jail, people are serving time for misdemeanors. Just last year, we had to change the law because Connecticut still had a poll tax in effect, because we had a law that said until you pay your court fines, people who've been released from custody couldn't have the right to vote even 20 years after they'd been released from custody, and people on probation and parole didn't either. So look, I think that a right to vote is critical, and it's something that we should expect the Department of Corrections to enforce in areas where it has custody. And I think that's something that the next Secretary of State should actually prioritize.
Thank you. Representative Elliott.
So the metric for my campaign of what success would be was pushing policy and trying to ensure that the conversations we had were as broad as possible. And so when I first started, I decided to make this campaign about ranked choice voting, about voting for people who are incarcerated, and vastly expanding the conversation around how early we should vote, pushing 3 weeks to a month, and pushing for an opt-out versus an opt-in system, meaning that you should get your ballot every single cycle. I'm the person who's been talking with every single DTC around the state as a rule about voting for people who are incarcerated. Part of that is because I know that what we're aiming to do is not just reduce recidivism, we're aiming to ensure that people are successful upon reentry. And I also know that if you're somebody who has a stake and tie to your community, you are so much more likely to be successful. And someone who is paying attention to the political climate and who's engaged and wants to be able to vote and wants to vote is someone who will be successful. And these are rights that were stripped from people about 70 years ago. And I am willing to push what is in some ways unpopular. There was somebody who just this week said, I'm not with you. I'm not with you for that reason, because I don't think people who are in prison should be able to vote. And I said, well, if you look at who's in prison, it's people who are, and I'll end with this sentence, it's people who are primarily have mental health issues, they have learning disabilities, it's a marker of socioeconomic status, or they're there for no longer the underlying offense, but parole and probation offenses.
Thank you. Representative Thomas.
Thank you. Oh, wait, the question, yes. I think it's definitely something that just we have, as a society, have to think about in general, like what we're hoping to gain when we incarcerate people. I absolutely think people should not lose their right to vote. As Attorney Jennings said, there are also a lot of people in prison who haven't lost their right, whether because of the type of offense, or many people who are just awaiting trial who have not been convicted of a thing are in prison, and it's very difficult for them to exercise their right to vote as well. It's something I would be very open to looking into because most people in our prison are not guilty for life. And if we want them to come back and rejoin the community and have a stake in it, we have to make sure that they feel a part of that community, and the right to vote is the most fundamental way to do that.
Thank you for your answer. Alderman Brackeen.
Yes, thank you. For the city of New Haven, I serve as the Health and Human Services Chairman, and I've actually served on several boards concerning prison reentry within New Haven County in particular. And this issue has come up time and time again. So my answer is yes, I am in strong support of ensuring that incarcerated individuals have their right to vote, because it was not too long ago that they were being counted. In terms of the prison gerrymandering. And I serve as the president of the Urban League of Southern Connecticut Young Professionals, which in a collaboration with the NAACP, successfully got that passed. And I know there's certain legislators here that sponsored that, and that's great. But look, as someone who has to oversee the city's oversight around prison reentry and the incarcerated, and like I said, our cities are most impacted by these issues. I strongly believe that the prison system is, the prison complex does need a lot of changes in terms of restoration. But in terms of this issue, I think it's vitally important.
Thank you. Representative Santiago.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. I mean, in listening to everyone and what their opinions would be, I think it's something that I would look at, but not right now. Again, early voting is more priority for me, no excuse absentee ballot. But people need to also look at, if you're going to have people behind bars have access ballot, okay, let's do an education in prison. Start there, and how civic engagement and how important it is for them to become voters once they leave prison. People, I mean, I've worked with Senator Murphy for 15 years. And one of the things that the federal government does, and people should start thinking about this, when you are in prison, you lose your benefits. You lose your SSI, you lose your SSDI, you lose your pensions. Those are benefits that you lose once you become incarcerated. Let's start talking about keeping those kind of benefits while people are in prison, because sometimes they still have to pay their rent. They still have to house other folks in their homes. Let's talk about that. And that should be done at the federal level. The access to ballot is important, and I believe people should vote. But I think there's other issues that we need to really look at in the state of Connecticut before that is even thought about. That's my opinion.
Thank you so much for your answers to that question. This will be the last question to sort of close us out. And again, thank you so much. This has been a great conversation. I've learned a lot, personally from all of you, and just really great conversation here. So the last question is this: while there are lots of people who have legitimate concerns about election integrity, and then there, of course, is a lot of fake concerns about election integrity. What are your thoughts about improving and enhancing the post-election audit program that Connecticut does? And in particular, there's a lot of interest in risk limiting audits occurring. And we're interested in what your thoughts are about that. And can I start with Representative Elliott first?
Yeah, I think even just in the question holds the answer, is that we need to be ensuring that these processes are as transparent as possible. And we need to be ensuring that if people have concerns, that we address those concerns. One thing that I find particularly interesting about the question of fraud generally is that Democrats have this knee-jerk reaction to say that there's simply no fraud. And fraud can exist. And it's our job to ensure that we have systems in place when elections are over to suss them out if it exists, or to suss out when there's problems in terms of any sort of election administration. And that is the mark of what is a good system, because we can't solve every problem as it's happening. Sometimes we have to let systems unfold, come back to it, and make sure that we have as much information as humanly possible. So with risk limiting audits, we know by the 99.99% success or assuredness that these campaigns or these elections are run free and clear.
Thank you. Thank you. Attorney Jennings.
All right, thank you very much. I think that the post-election audit program is critical, because you need to know whether or not there is voter suppression going on in the polls, and you need to know as soon as people get out. I used to participate in as an attorney in going and taking affidavits of people who were not allowed to vote. And sometimes I would just walk them right back in the front door and say, you're going to let this person vote because you have no reason for not letting them vote. I have come up with a list of 22 different things that people were told when there's two voting lists, the active list and the inactive list. People on the active voters list walk in and they vote. People on the inactive voters list go through, well, you can't vote here because you vote in East Hartford. You didn't vote in the last election, so you can't vote in this election. You have to go downtown and register. I mean, I have a list of 22 things people were told by inside poll workers who were hired to work with them. So I think that we should have a post-election audit program for every single election. I was an observer for the Secretary of State in the Bridgeport elections, in Hartford elections, and I can tell you, we need to know what happens in those polls immediately after. We need to get affidavits and statements from people to find out what happened, because there is a lot of voter suppression taking place.
Thank you for your answer. Representative Santiago, the same question.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. I'll be brief with this. I sat on the task force appointed by the leadership of the GAE committee with the risk limiting audit. And they worked with 5 towns in order to do that. Elections need to be free, fair, and accessible. And what the risk limiting audit does is basically audit small towns and the bigger cities to make sure that the ballots, a certain percentage of those ballots cast, were legitimate. And they weren't doing that before. Everything was being checked by receipts, because now that everything is automated, you put in the ballot, a receipt comes out at the end of the night when you pick up your numbers in each precinct. So now with the risk limiting audit, it will make sure that the elections are true, that what happened, what each candidate got for the count is a true count. And I think it's something that we need to really implement in the state of Connecticut.
Thank you. Alderman Brackeen.
Yes, I strongly agree that in terms of post-auditing, it's vitally important, in particular the risk limiting audits and that process that has happened over the last few years or so. Look, I think the details of incremental auditing is very vital. With any organization, you have to assess the risk and review the issues. So I know risk limiting auditing is one example of post-elections auditing. Why not increase the transparency? There's nothing wrong with that. If there's another way to ensure that there's another layer to address the issues that may be false but you know what? There's nothing wrong with getting the answer of the truth. You know, more transparency, the better.
Thank you so much. Representative Thomas.
Thank you. This is a great example of a study bill that worked. We passed it in GAE. The study was conducted, Rep. Santiago, statisticians, and many other people sat on the committee. They came back with a study in January, which we fast-tracked. And we just passed a bill out of committee to bring that process along to the next step. I think everybody would agree, no matter what side of the aisle they sit on, that in 2024, we want to have absolute trust in the result of the elections. So on GAE, we are working as hard as we can to make sure that risk limiting audits can be implemented. In time for 2024. We thought we might be able to get something done by 2023, but all the experts from across a wide spectrum testified last week that they did not think that would work, but we should be set by 2024.
Thank you so much. And Senator Matt Lesser.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to have a slightly different take. First of all, I support the work of the risk limiting audit task force. I'm certainly open to the concept. The bill that was actually drafted by the folks on the GAE committee, Senate Bill 472, is a mess. It's a real mess, and I'm not sure if it can be salvaged this year or not. I listened to what Attorney Jennings said, and I agree with every single point she made about some of the real problems in our elections, and we do need robust audits, and we need safeguards in place. And I would just say the Voting Rights Act would provide them on the front end. Senate Bill 472, this bill that's before GAE, at least as it is right now, needs a lot of work. And so, you know, it's possible that it can be salvaged this session, but if not, we should, you know, put some, maybe cool it, get some more stakeholder input, and make sure that we've got real robust safeguards that don't hurt our election system.
Well, thank you so much. I think we are right at 8:31, so I'm 1 minute over. So hopefully Sherry Quickmeyer will, you know, have me back as a moderator and not tell me I went over time and I did a bad job. So I want to thank everyone for, you know, for their comments and responses to the questions. I think we clearly have, you know, 6 really good candidates. And so this is going to be hard for folks to sort of decide who, you know, they'd like out of this group to actually become the next Secretary of State of Connecticut. So Sherry, is there anything you want to say to close us out? But otherwise, that's it for me. Just thank you again for cooperating within the time frame, which is really good. So, and I really appreciate that.
I just wanted to thank everyone for participating, and thank you, Dr. Siku, for your moderation. I am sorry that there weren't people from the other side of the aisle interested in participating, but I'm not shocked, but I'm disappointed. And I am very, very happy that we had as much of a robust conversation, that everybody didn't agree on every single issue. I think it went, I really appreciate all of your comments. So thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll be in touch about early voting.
All right. Goodbye, everybody. Thanks a lot. Thanks to the
Thank
audience
you,
as well.
Doctor.
And thanks for those questions.
Thank you.
Take
All
care.
right. Thank
Bye-bye.
you for that.
Great job.
Thanks.